Grandmother left me a key to a house that burned down. I was 36 years old when my grandmother left me a rusted key in a velvet jewelry box. Not her house, not her savings, not the pearl earrings she wore every Sunday. Just a key. It was long and narrow, darker than copper, with teeth so uneven they looked hand-cut. A strip of masking tape was wrapped around the stem, yellowed with age. On it, in my grandmother's careful handwriting, were 3 words. For the house. That was the part that made no sense, because the only house my grandmother ever called the house had burned down 40 years earlier. I was standing in the law office when the attorney slid the little box across the polished table. This was specifically named in her will, he said. My mother looked embarrassed. My uncle gave a short laugh. A key, he said. That's it. The attorney checked the paper in front of him. She directed that it go to Clara only. That was me. My mother pressed her lips together. My mother got sentimental near the end. She was sharp until the end, I said. No one answered. I opened the box again and touched the key with one finger. It was cold, even in the warm room. My grandmother had raised me after my father died. She was not a woman who did things by accident. She labeled leftovers, saved receipts, sharpened pencils before putting them in drawers. If she left me a key, she meant for me to use it. My uncle leaned back in his chair. Well, he said, good luck opening ashes. My mother shot him a look, but she didn't correct him. The old Calloway house had burned down when my mother was 17. I knew the story because everyone in our family knew the story. Lightning storm, old wiring, fast fire, nothing saved. After that, my grandmother moved into the small brick ranch where she lived until the day she died. The burned house became family history, a sad sentence spoken at holidays, a place that existed only in photographs. But when I held that key, I had the strange feeling my grandmother had handed me a question, and she expected me to answer it. That night, I took the key home and laid it on my kitchen table. I searched online for old property records. Calloway Road still existed, but the address did not. At least not officially. The county records showed the parcel had been sold 3 years after the fire, then divided, then sold again. Now it was listed as part of a private timber lot owned by a company I had never heard of. Still, the original survey map was there. A square marked house. A smaller rectangle behind it marked pump house. And beside the main structure, a narrow marking labeled cellar entry. I sat up straighter. I had heard about the fire my whole life. No one had ever mentioned a cellar. The next morning, I called my mother. Did Grandma's old house have a cellar? There was a pause. I don't remember. You lived there. I was a teenager, Clara. I don't remember every corner of a house that burned down before you were born. Her answer came too fast. Did you ever go down there? Another pause. Then her voice cooled. Why are you doing this? Because Grandma left me a key? She left you grief in a box. No, I said. She left me a door, my mother sighed. That house is gone. Some things are better left that way. I hung up more certain than before. By noon, I was driving toward Calloway Road. The road was narrower than I expected, lined with pines and old ditches full of weeds. I almost missed the turn because the mailbox was gone and the driveway had become 2 faint ruts in the grass. I parked where the ruts ended. For a moment, I just sat there. The woods were quiet. Too quiet. Then I got out with the old survey map folded in my hand. The house was gone. Of course it was. There was only a shallow depression in the ground, a few blackened stones, and brick fragments half swallowed by moss. Trees had grown through what must have been the front room. But the land still remembered. A row of foundation stones marked a rectangle beneath the leaves. I walked slowly, matching the survey to the ground. Main house, chimney base. Well, then I turned toward where the map showed the cellar entry. At first, I saw nothing. Then my boot scraped metal. I knelt and brushed away damp leaves. An iron ring appeared beneath the dirt. My heart started pounding. I pulled. Nothing happened. I pulled harder. The ground shifted. Leaves broke apart. A wooden hatch door emerged from under decades of rot and soil, reinforced with iron bands. And in the center was a lock, a rusted lock. I took out the key. My hand was shaking so badly I had to steady it with the other one. The key slid in halfway, then stuck. I almost laughed from disappointment. Then I remembered my grandmother's sewing machine oil. She used to dab it on stuck zippers and stubborn hinges. I had a small bottle in my car because I had taken things from her house the week before. I ran back, got it, and dripped oil into the lock. This time, the key turned. The sound was soft. A click. 40 years of silence opened beneath my hand. The hatch was heavy, but not sealed. Cold air breathed up from below, damp and earthy. I turned on my phone flashlight and pointed it down. Stone steps descended into darkness. I should have called someone, I know that now. But in that moment, the only thing I could think was that my grandmother had left this for me. Not my mother, not my uncle, me, so I went down. The cellar smelled of wet stone and old paper. At the bottom was a narrow room with shelves built into the walls. Most were empty. Some held cracked jars, rusted cans, and stacks of ruined newspapers. The fire had not reached here. That was my first real answer. The house burned, but not everything under it did. At the far end of the cellar stood a green metal cabinet. It was the kind used in offices decades ago, with 2 doors and a small keyhole. The key did not fit. I searched the shelves, the floor, even the underside of an old work table. Nothing. Then my light caught a mark scratched into the cabinet door, not random scratches. Letters, MC, 1979. My mother's initials. My breath caught. My mother had been here, and she had remembered. I tried the handle. Locked. I took photos of everything, then climbed back out and covered the hatch with branches as best I could. On the drive home, my phone rang 3 times. My mother, I did not answer. When I got home, she was waiting in my driveway. She was still in her work clothes, arms crossed, face pale. "Where were you?" she asked. I got out slowly. Callaway Road. Her expression changed before she could stop it. "You had no right." Grandma gave me the key. "That land isn't ours anymore. But the cellar is still there." She looked away. That told me everything. "You knew," I said. "No, you carved your initials into a cabinet down there." Her eyes snapped back to mine. For a second, she looked almost afraid of me. Then she said, "You need to stop." "Why?" "Because your grandmother was not the woman you think she was." That landed hard. My grandmother had been steady, gentle, quietly strict. She sent birthday cards to neighbors' children and never forgot a casserole for a funeral. "What is in that cabinet?" I asked. My mother's mouth tightened. "Nothing that will help you." "Then tell me." "I can't or won't." She stepped closer. "Clara, listen to me. That house burned for a reason." I stared at her. "All my life, you said it was lightning." "That is what people needed to believe." Then she got in her car and left. I stood in the driveway until her taillights disappeared. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I had decided on the one person my mother would not expect me to ask. My grandmother's older sister, Aunt June. She was 91, sharp as broken glass, and living in an assisted living apartment that smelled like lavender soap and old books. When I showed her the key, she did not ask where I got it. She simply closed her eyes. "So Margaret finally did it," she said. "Margaret was my grandmother." "Did what?" Aunt June opened her eyes again. "Chose someone brave enough." "For what?" She pointed to the chair across from her. I sat. "Your grandmother always said the house kept one room after the fire." "The cellar?" Aunt June nodded. "She wouldn't let anyone talk about it." "What was down there?" "A truth she couldn't carry and couldn't destroy." My skin prickled. "What truth?" Aunt June reached for a framed photograph on her side table and handed it to me. It showed my grandmother as a young woman standing on the porch of the Callaway house. Beside her stood Aunt June. Beside Aunt June was a man I did not recognize, and beside him was a little boy. Maybe 6 years old. The boy had dark hair, serious eyes, and one hand gripping my grandmother's skirt. "Who is that child?" I asked. Aunt June watched me carefully. "His name was Samuel." I waited. The name meant nothing to me. "He lived with your grandmother for 11 months. Why have I never heard of him?" "Because after the fire, everyone agreed he had never been there." The room seemed to tilt. "A child disappeared in that fire?" "No," Aunt June said. "That was the first lie." I looked down at the photograph again. Samuel's small face stared back at me from 40 years ago. "Then, what happened to him?" "That," Aunt June said, "is what the key is for." I drove home with the photograph on the passenger seat. My theory changed completely. I had thought the key opened some hidden family keepsake. Then I thought it opened a cabinet tied to my mother. Now there was a child no one had ever mentioned. A child erased from the family. I spent the afternoon searching old newspaper archives. The Callaway House fire had been reported in 3 short paragraphs. Local home destroyed in storm fire. No injuries, no mention of a missing child. I searched Samuel with my grandmother's last name. Nothing. Samuel with Callaway Road. Nothing. Then I searched the date of the fire with the word child. One result appeared, not from our county, from 2 towns over. Boy returned to county care after false placement records discovered. No name, no photo, just one sentence buried in a column about local court proceedings. A minor child had been removed from an unauthorized guardianship arrangement following a residence fire. Unauthorized guardianship. I read the sentence 3 times, then I called Aunt June again. Was Samuel adopted? No. Fostered? No. Then why was he living with Grandma? Aunt June was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, because his mother asked Margaret to hide him. Hide him from who? His father. I closed my eyes. That was the first answer that made everything worse. Samuel had not been lost in the fire. He had been hidden before it, and someone had found out. I went back to the cellar the next morning with bolt cutters. I know that sounds dramatic. It felt practical. The cabinet lock snapped on the 3rd try. Inside were 4 things: a bundle of letters tied with blue thread, a child's red sweater folded carefully, a cassette tape, and a small metal cash box. The letters were addressed to my grandmother, all from a woman named Irene Vale. The first letter began, "Margaret, if he finds us, he will take Samuel." The next 3 described a man named Arthur Vale, violent, connected, friends with deputies. A man who had convinced people Irene was unstable and the child was safer with him. The final letter was different. The handwriting shook. "I can't keep running. Please take him, just until I can prove what he is." I sat on the cold cellar floor with my flashlight in my lap. My grandmother had hidden a child from his father. Not for money, not for scandal, to protect him, so why had everyone erased him? I opened the cash box. Inside was a birth certificate, a faded school picture, and a newspaper clipping. The clipping showed Arthur Vale. He was standing beside the county sheriff at a fundraiser. The headline read, "Local businessman honored for community service." I turned the birth certificate over. On the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, was a sentence: "He is not the father." For a moment, I forgot to breathe. Arthur Vale had not been Samuel's father. That was the contradiction. If Arthur was not the father, why was he hunting the boy? Then I played the cassette tape in my car. My grandmother's voice filled the silence, younger but unmistakable. "If you are hearing this, Clara, then I am gone and I am sorry. I wanted to tell you myself. I wanted to tell your mother first, but she has spent her life trying not to know." There was a long pause, then she continued. "The fire was not an accident. Arthur Vale said it, but not to kill Samuel. He said it to destroy proof." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "Samuel was not Irene's secret," my grandmother said. "He was ours." The tape clicked. Static, then silence. I sat there, frozen. Ours, not mine, not Irene's. Ours. My grandmother had a secret child. That was my first thought. Then I looked again at the photograph Aunt June had given me. Samuel holding my grandmother's skirt, my grandmother's hand resting protectively on his shoulder. But he did not look like her. He looked like someone else. Someone I had seen in old albums. My grandfather. I drove straight to my mother's house. She opened the door and looked at my face. "You found the tape," she said. "Who was Samuel?" She stepped back into the hallway. For once, she looked tired instead of guarded. "He was my brother." The word struck harder than I expected. Brother. My mother had a brother. My grandmother had a son, and no one had told me. "Half-brother?" I asked. My mother nodded once. "My father had an affair with Irene Vale, and Arthur Vale thought Samuel was his, at first. But then he found out." She turned away. I followed her into the kitchen. "Grandma took him in. She thought it would be temporary. Irene was trying to get away. She had documents proving Arthur had been using her name to hide money from his business. What does that have to do with Samuel?" My mother looked at me. Samuel was entitled to part of Arthur's estate if Arthur admitted paternity. Arthur had used him publicly when it suited him. Then, when he learned Samuel wasn't his, he wanted the boy gone and the records gone with him. So he burned the house. To destroy Irene's letters, the birth records, anything connecting him to the fraud. But Samuel survived. Yes. What happened to him? My mother's eyes filled, and that was when I understood. She was not hiding a scandal. She was hiding guilt. You were there, I said. Her face crumpled. I was 17. What happened? She sat at the table like her legs had given out. Grandma told me to take Samuel through the cellar door and run to the creek road. She said she would distract Arthur. I had him by the hand. I swear I did. Her voice cracked. The smoke was everywhere. He was coughing. I heard something fall upstairs and I panicked. I let go for 1 second. I said nothing. He ran back for his sweater, that red sweater. He loved it. I went after him, but the heat. He didn't die, I said. No, a deputy found him outside. Arthur's deputy. He took Samuel before Grandma could get to him. County care, I whispered. My mother nodded. Grandma tried to find him. Irene had disappeared by then. Arthur denied everything. The sheriff said there was no child living with us. Grandma had no legal papers that hadn't burned or vanished. But they didn't vanish, I said. She kept them in the cellar. She couldn't use them. Not then, not against those men. So she stayed quiet. She was threatened. We all were. My anger rose before I could stop it. And later. After Arthur died? After the sheriff died? Why keep lying? My mother wiped her face. Because by then, Samuel was gone. The records said he had been transferred out of state. Grandma spent years writing letters, hiring people, nothing. Did she ever find him? My mother shook her head. I don't know, but I did not believe her, not completely, because my grandmother had not left me a tape that ended at the worst part of the story. She had left me a key, and the key had opened the cellar. The cellar had opened the cabinet. The cabinet had opened Samuel. There had to be another door. I went back to my grandmother's ranch that evening. Most of her things had already been boxed, but I still had access until the estate cleared. I searched with new eyes, not for valuables, for patterns. My grandmother kept everything organized by year. Photos, receipts, tax records, church bulletins, but there was one gap, 1980 to 1984, 4 missing years after the fire. I checked closets, drawers, the attic, nothing. Then I remembered the velvet jewelry box. The key had been inside it, but the box had felt heavier than it should have. I turned it over and peeled back the worn lining. A folded slip of paper was tucked underneath. On it was an address, not Callaway Road. A post office box in West Virginia, and beneath it, one line, he chose a new name. My hands went numb. Samuel had lived. My grandmother had found him. I searched the address online. The post office had closed years ago, but old public records connected the box to a man named Thomas Reed. Thomas Reed had died 8 months earlier. No spouse listed. No children listed. But there was an estate notice. The executor was a woman named Nina Reed. His sister. I called the number listed in the notice with my heart hammering so hard I could barely hear the ring. A woman answered. When I said my grandmother's name, she went silent. Then she asked, "Are you Clara?" I gripped the phone. "Yes," she exhaled shakily. Thomas said someone might call one day. Was Thomas really Samuel? Another silence. "Yes." I closed my eyes. "Did he know about us?" "He knew some," Nina said. "Not everything. He remembered the fire. He remembered a girl letting go of his hand. He remembered your grandmother finding him years later. Why didn't he come back? Because he believed his return would destroy your mother. That was the final lock. Not the cellar, not the cabinet, not the records. My mother. Samuel had stayed away because of her guilt. And my grandmother had let him. Nina mailed me a package 2 days later. Inside was a letter from Samuel, not Thomas. Samuel. It was addressed to whoever Margaret trusts with the key. I read it at my kitchen table beside the rusted key that had started everything. He wrote that he remembered more than people thought. He remembered Arthur striking the cellar door with something heavy. He remembered my grandmother shouting. He remembered my mother pulling him down the steps. He remembered letting go. But he also remembered why, not because of the sweater. Because he had seen Arthur drop a metal box near the kitchen doorway, the cash box, the proof. Samuel had run back to get it because he had heard my grandmother say it was the only thing that could save Irene. He was 6 years old. He thought saving the box meant saving his mother. He got it as far as the cellar steps before smoke overtook him. My mother had not failed him. She had misunderstood him. Everyone had. The deputy who found him outside took him away, but Samuel had hidden the cash box under the broken cellar shelf before he collapsed. That was why Arthur never found it. That was why my grandmother kept the key. That was why she waited. The house had burned down, but the truth had been locked beneath it the whole time. At the bottom of Samuel's letter was one final request. Tell her I never blamed her. I took the letter to my mother. She read it standing by her kitchen sink. Halfway through, she covered her mouth. By the end, she was crying so hard she had to sit down. He didn't blame me, she whispered. No, she pressed the letter to her chest like it was a living thing. For the first time in my life, my mother looked younger and older at the same time. A week later, we drove together to Callaway Road. We brought Aunt June, though she complained about the bumps the entire way. The three of us stood over the cellar hatch in the quiet woods. My mother held the rusted key. I watched her slide it into the lock and turn it. This time, she opened it herself. We did not go down for secrets. There were no more left. We went down for Samuel's red sweater, still folded in the cabinet where my grandmother had kept it safe. My mother held it for a long time. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." The woods gave no answer, but for once they did not feel silent. They felt like they had finally stopped holding their breath. In the months that followed, we used the documents to correct what could still be corrected. Arthur Vale was long dead. So was the sheriff. So was Irene. There would be no courtroom confession, no dramatic arrest, no perfect justice. But Samuel got his name back. His real one. His story went into the county record. The fire report was amended. And my grandmother's old house, which everyone had called a ruin, became something else to me. Not a place where everything ended. A place where one stubborn woman hid the truth so carefully that even fire could not take it. People kept asking why my grandmother waited so long. I think I understand now. She was not waiting for the world to become fair. She was waiting for someone who would follow the question all the way down. The key did not open a house. The house was gone. It opened the only part of the past that had survived. And once it opened, none of us could pretend the ashes were empty anymore.